Today's session will be recorded and hosted in the shared Google Drive for your future reference. Since this is a nibble and not a feast, remember, if this is your first time, put your questions in the chat. All the questions will be collected, answered, and shared in the drive if we don't get to them at the end, along with references and resources. If you have a question after we've ended, send it to us and we'll make sure it gets answered and added to the document. In your role as a mentor, you are not expected to have legal expertise. You will have access to Heather's information, network, and resources to share with your households. We are excited to have Heather Strickland, owner of Myers Strickland Family Law, with us today. She is a fellow of the Adoption and Assisted Reproduction Attorneys. She is also recognized in 2017 as an angel in adoptions by the Congressional Coalition of Adoption Institute for her dedication to positive child welfare practices. A native of Tucson, Heather is located in Arizona with me and with Dahlia as well. We're very excited. She has been practicing adoption, assisted reproduction, and family law in Arizona since 2005 with the highest standards of ethics and professionalism. She helps couples and individuals build their families, and she is sharing an introduction to this topic with us. We anticipate this informational session running at least 30 minutes. You will always have the opportunity to stay with us and continue the conversation at the end, or move to the breakout rooms for networking or questions. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Heather. So Heather, welcome.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Do I now have control? Okay, thank you very much. All right. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. I could talk for hours and probably days about this topic, but of course, my goal is to just give you an overview so you get some kind of an idea of what people are facing when they're looking at building their family using assisted reproduction. So of course, I have to start with a legal disclaimer. I'm nobody's attorney here, and if anybody would like specific legal advice, it's important that they contact an attorney. And this presentation is only current as of today. Things are changing at a lightning pace, and so yes, things could be different tomorrow. All right. So what is assisted reproductive technology? What are we even talking about? And in general, it's conception by any means other than sexual intercourse. So even though we have the word technology in there, assisted reproduction really can be a medical treatment, but it also can be do-it-yourself sperm or insemination using sperm, which is becoming increasingly popular and common. So it doesn't always have to be involving a doctor, but oftentimes it does. So we're talking about intrauterine insemination. This is what we used to call artificial insemination. This is where the sperm is actually placed inside the uterus and it has to be performed by a physician. Intravaginal insemination is where the sperm is placed into the vagina without sexual intercourse. This can be done at home. It can be done by a physician. It can also be done by a midwife. There's a lot of tutorials online. There are at-home insemination kits available on Amazon. So this is a readily available method of building a family. And for some people, they use a partner sperm or they will use donated sperm. And this donated sperm doesn't always have to be from somebody that they know. Sperm banks will ship sperm to somebody's house and then they can do a self-insemination in their own home. In vitro fertilization is where we're fertilizing the eggs with sperm outside of the body. So anytime the eggs are handled outside of the body, we're talking about in vitro fertilization. And in vitro fertilization is just the fertilization of the eggs and the sperm, and then probably most likely cryopreserving them. It does not include then the actual transfer of the embryo into a uterus. That's actually an additional medical procedure. So with IVF, we can have any number of combinations of eggs and sperm. It can be, of the people who are intending to raise the child, which in my industry, we call them intended parents, or there can be donated sperm, or donated egg. And sometimes it's both donated egg and donated sperm, and sometimes it's actually a donated embryo. So folks were able to obtain the embryo through the donation of somebody else. Assisted reproduction also includes reciprocal IVF. This is where embryos were created, where we took the eggs from spouse A, they were fertilized in vitro, and then they were ultimately transferred to the uterus of spouse B. So the woman carrying the child has no genetic to the child, but is genetically related to her female spouse. And in terms of the sperm source, they could be using known donor sperm or anonymously or unidentified sperm. And then we have and then finally we have surrogacy. This is, surrogacy is the term people use most commonly, but again, in my world, we tend to use the term gestational carrier. When we have a gestational carrier, which is by far the most common form of surrogacy, the woman carrying the child has no genetic connection to the child whatsoever. A traditional surrogate is where a woman actually carries a pregnancy where she does have a genetic connection to the child. And this traditional surrogacy can include situations where a woman donated her eggs, those eggs were fertilized in vitro, and then were transferred back to her uterus. So we sometimes see that where a woman's willing to be both the egg donor and the surrogate. So I wanted to just run through a quick history of assisted reproduction because it has been around for a long time. I mean, since 1790, that's when we had our first successful insemination, at least in London. The United States took another 100 years to catch up. And then in 1954, that's when we had our first case of a successful pregnancy using frozen sperm. So at least sperm donation has been around for a long time. 1978 is when we had our first IVF baby, meaning this is where the egg was fertilized outside of the body, and then the embryo was transferred into the uterus. That happened in 1978 in London. The United States followed just a few years behind. But it's important to note that at that time, the embryo was created and then immediately transferred to the uterus. It was not cryopreserved or frozen. And it wasn't until 1984 that we had our first successful live birth from frozen embryos. So in 1992, that's when the CDC started actually collecting information about what was going on with respect to in vitro fertilization, IVF. So, and then in 1997, we started seeing successful pregnancies using frozen eggs. Previously, we'd used frozen sperm, we'd used frozen embryos, but using frozen eggs was a big success story in 1997. And in 2012, the technology actually improved for frozen eggs, and we saw that egg preservation was becoming commercialized. A lot of big companies got on the bandwagon in 2012. Google, Apple, in offering egg preservation services or to their employees, which caused a lot of concern about, was this now creating a culture where people were being pressured into not having their families or waiting to have families? So how common is this? How often are we seeing assisted reproduction? The problem is we don't have a lot of data. The CDC only collects data on a very specific form of fertility treatment, and that is where the eggs and the embryos are handled outside of the body. The CDC doesn't collect data about anything else. So we are completely missing data on treatment on where only sperm are handled, or certainly we do not have any data on the at-home inseminations. And we're also missing data on procedures where like a woman only takes medication to stimulate her egg production, or other methods of trying to improve the ability to conceive that don't involve actually removing the eggs from the body. So it is hard to say how common it is because the only data we have is very specific. In addition to the CDC, there's also an organization called the Society for Assisted Reproductive Technology, and they keep a lot of data as well. So according to the CDC's data, and they're always about 2.5 years behind in providing the data to us. In 2021, 2.3% of all infants born in the United States were conceived with the use of in vitro fertilization. So again, not sperm or inseminations, but just where certainly the egg and the embryos were handled outside of the body. And so we have at least 453 clinics in the United States reporting their data to the CDC. And at least in 2021, there were 97,000 babies born as a result of that. Now, the number of deliveries is lower than the number of live infants born because oftentimes we do have twins. And the usage of assisted reproduction has doubled in the last decade, according to the CDC. So with the data being behind the times, we have to think about 2021 was pandemic year. So in 2020, many clinics actually closed and stopped serving patients for a little while until, it could be determined if this was safe to continue. And then so then the 2021 data is really low, or is only being reported. I can tell you in my own practice, the work that I'm doing related to assisted reproduction has tripled in the last year. So I expect the data when it comes out for 2023 and 2024 we're going to see these numbers having really increased. So why should people be aware of assisted reproduction? The fact of the matter is infertility is incredibly common and it's becoming more common. It's also becoming talked about a lot more. It's a topic that people are a lot more comfortable discussing. And the official definition of infertility is the inability to become pregnant within 12 months after regular unprotected intercourse. Or, and this is where they've expanded the definition, there's some kind of an impairment of a person's capacity to reproduce either as an individual or with his or her partner. And the purpose behind expanding that definition was to include the fact that LGBTQ couples are experience infertility simply because of the circumstances. So according to Resolve, 1 in 8 couples in the US experiences infertility. And when they're looking at what are the causes of infertility, it's divided in thirds, approximately thirds between it's some issue with the woman, it's some issue with the male, and then there's the third that's it's a combination of both or it's unexplained. So there's still unexplained infertility out there. We also know that LGBTQ individuals and couples are building families. Family Equality did a family building survey in 2019, and they estimated that there's at least 3.8 million millennials considering expanding their families, and that was back in 2019. So, okay, so what are some of the legal implications? What do people who are considering building their family need to be aware of? How many contracts does it take to make a baby is really the joke. And the answer is a lot. And so I just provide this list and want to talk about what some of these things are because there's a lot of legal documents that people are going to be signing, and they may want to engage in services of a lawyer just to better understand what it is that they're signing, because these documents can have a lot of implications. So there's the service agreements that folks are signing with sperm banks, with egg banks, with egg donation programs or surrogacy programs, or even fertility clinics. These are long documents. They're usually in, size 10 point font. I mean, they're really, they do have legal significance. In addition to service agreements, folks are going to be signing informed consent documents at a fertility clinic. There's a lot of documents that's going to explain medical procedures, but then even touches on legal implications of what they're doing. And those informed consent documents also can be have real serious legal implications. There's the purchase agreement if they purchase their sperm or their eggs. They have storage agreements with fertility clinics or long-term storage facilities where their eggs are hanging out, their sperm's hanging out, or their unused embryos are hanging out. And so they need to know what's in those storage agreements. If they're using donor egg, sperm, or embryos, there could actually be donor agreements that are direct between the people who are giving the gamete and those who are receiving the gametes. Some some embryo donations, and I put adoption in quotes, I hate to call them agencies because agency suggests that there's some kind of government regulation or oversight of it, but it isn't. It's just like it's a matching program. So there are embryo donation programs where they operate a little bit more on the model similar to adoption, where families who are going to receive the embryos are home studied and vetted before they would receive an embryo. But there can be the agreements related to the transfer of ownership of the embryos that way. In between partners, even married or unmarried, partners can have their own usage agreements between themselves. Okay, we're going to create these embryos, but I don't want you to use them if I die, or it's totally fine with me that you use them if I pass away. So, or saying, okay, if we break up, we're agreeing that this is how these are going to be used. And then, of course, if they have a person who's going to carry a pregnancy for them, there's a massive gestational carrier agreement. When I first started doing this work, gestational carrier agreements were maybe 25 pages long, and now they are routinely 60 pages long. They're a snooze fest. It's so. Okay. So another major legal implication is the fact that birth certificates are no longer enough to establish for people to say that they are parents. And this never was an issue before gamete donation and gestational carriers became so common. But birth certificates are not the equivalent of a court order. They're an administrative document. And they're actually a record of the child's birth and the child's identity. They're not intended to be the identity of the parents. And when babies are born, the information that goes on a birth certificate, other than their specific data of date they were born, hospital they were born, time they were born in, all the rest is self-reported. There's no verification of the information or data that goes on to a birth certificate. That's why they're administrative in nature, and they don't have the equivalent of a court order. And yet, society really places a lot of emphasis on what is on that birth certificate. So when you have families, though, that are building their families with donated sperm, eggs, embryos, if anyone is just not going to have a genetic connection to the child, or certainly even if they're using a gestational carrier, there needs to be a court order stating that somebody is a parent. This is just more crucial than ever before. And an order of adoption is at this point in time still considered our gold standard. There are other types of court orders that are still incredibly valuable, but an order of adoption is considered the best. But it isn't always needed, but it is still considered the best. And the reason why it's considered the gold standard is because we have a United States Supreme Court case that says, and if an adoption is granted in one state, it has to be recognized, meaning it's given full faith and credit in every other state of the country. So, some other legal implications is, what are we going to do with the surplus embryos? We've got the best medical practice, which is let's create as many embryos as we possibly can so we can choose the best ones. And that's colliding with the emotional reality of having surplus embryos and then having to decide what to do with them. The financial considerations of that, it's not cheap to store, surplus embryos for long periods of time. You've got ethical dilemmas, personal moral dilemmas, personal values about, how do people view these embryos? And then, as certainly we have seen this year with Alabama and Florida, we're now seeing significant political implications as well about, our embryos considered persons, and laws making those, and laws changing, which makes somebody's ability to decide the future of their embryos even uncertain. So we could have folks with embryos stored someplace that then they need to move those embryos someplace else to make so that they could decide to donate them or discard them. So, there's some real legal implications of that and cost. And then estate planning is really important. And I'm sure you've had plenty of presentations on estate planning before, and I'm sure it's been hammered into you that, estate planning isn't just for rich people. But some of the things that need to go into estate planning when people are using assisted reproduction to build their families is they need to address if they have frozen eggs, sperm, or embryos remaining. They need to address that in their estate planning. They may not want that to pass to their estate and then therefore be their children's property. They may, they probably want to make a decision about what's going to happen with that. Do they really want their mom getting their embryos? What would their mom do with their embryos? So that raises also issues of posthumous parentage, because it is possible for people to become parents after they've passed away. Families and partners also need to address whether they would be comfortable with eggs or sperm being retrieved from their body upon death. It's a lot harder to retrieve eggs when somebody passes away, but it is possible to retrieve sperm. It has to be done within 24 hours, but it is possible, and it does raise a lot of issues. And if somebody has been generous in their life and donated their eggs or their sperm to other people, they need to address the fact that they may have genetic relatives out there and how they want their estate to recognize or refer to those individuals. In the 50s, the most common sperm donor was a white medical student. There was a huge amount of medical students donating their sperm. And of course, they were promised that nobody would ever know. And then 23andMe came along, Ancestry.com, and suddenly, that those genetic relationships were being discovered. And so, so estate planning actually needs to address that. But of course, a lot of people aren't going to discuss openly that they were a donor. So, and then we have a lot of emerging areas of discussion. I mentioned the posthumous retrieval and usage of sperm. That is still a hot topic right now. It's still something that we do talk a lot about establishing parentage. Is it possible? Can a child still inherit? Are there Social Security benefits available? So there's a lot of different things that are still being discussed on that. We have this emergence of previously unknown genetic relatives that's happening. And not just because of donation, but also through adoption. DNA testing just really eliminated anonymity. And so we have issues that about, can somebody establish that they are a parent, or that somebody is their parent as adults? What are the inheritance rights? Does anybody even have the right to privacy? I mean, if somebody placed a child for adoption in the 70s, maybe they don't want their identity discovered. And then, of course, there's rights of donor-conceived children. Other legal implications of some of this, fertility preservation rights, fertility preservation for folks who are facing some kind of medical treatment that's going to diminish their reproductive capacity. Cancer treatment is a big one. This is a big issue. There's a lot of ethical issues for minors too. If you've got minors who are facing cancer treatments that could affect their ability to have a family in the future, do you preserve those gametes? What are the parents' rights? What's the child's rights? So very complex issues. And then in today's world, for combat veterans, do military members should they have the right to preserve their fertility before they go off to a war zone? Because a lot of the folks don't pass away because of their injuries as much as they used to, but a lot of them sustain injuries that impair their ability to have a child. This was, in particular, we saw this because of those IUDs on the side of the, I hope I said that right, on the side of the road, and therefore having a lot of injuries to their legs and their groins. So we also have international law issues that are coming up. Are we going to be regulating surrogacy internationally? And then citizenship rights become really big deal when people decide to do surrogacy overseas. And then LGBTQ rights, couples experiencing infertility and having access to care. And then employment law is the one that I always laugh about. I cannot tell you the number of people who have come to me and said that their employee is willing to carry a child for them. And I just about fall off my chair because I cannot think of anything more, risky to your business. And I'm always saying, please go talk to an employment law attorney about this. But you'd be surprised at how many people volunteer to carry their boss's baby. So, and I'm sure you've seen, we've got medical malpractice issues. We have cryopreservation failures, laboratory mix-ups, mistakes. We have clinics that just shut down. There's one out of Tennessee that just shut their doors, and people don't know where their embryos are or whether they're even being cared for. Lack of informed consent. We have a lot of surprising history of physicians using their own sperm to impregnate patients. And then, of course, what are the ramifications of that? So now let's kind of hit the financial considerations. There is no way around it. Assisted reproduction is incredibly expensive, and it is absolutely a barrier to access. And this is part of the challenge and problem with it. The medical treatment is incredibly expensive. And these are just some of the medical treatments that they're going to be paying for. The legal fees, intended parents need attorneys, donors need attorneys, gestational carriers need attorneys. So again, back to that, how many contracts does it take to make a baby? There can be quite a bit of legal expense in that. And yet it's important because, it's important for people for their legal rights. It costs money to purchase eggs or sperm from a bank, from some kind of an egg or sperm bank, or to donate, or to compensate a donor who has provided eggs or sperm. Matching program fees to find donors or a gestational carrier. It's incredibly expensive to transport sperm, eggs, and embryos. It's like they come in these big cylinders because they're cryopreserved and and they have to go quickly. Medications, the medications that people have to take to stimulate their cycle to be ready to accept an embryo into their uterus is usually about $5,000 or $6,000 per cycle. And that's most of the time not covered by insurance at all. Gestational carrier compensation, what are you actually providing to the person who's going to carry your child? First-time gestational carriers right now, I'm seeing are receiving $50,000 to $55,000 as just their base compensation. And then there's all kinds of additional things that they can receive in addition to that. And people who are building their families through assisted reproduction, especially with gestational carriers, will never buy more insurance policies in their life than when they're in the middle of this journey. There are insurance policies that they are contractually obligated to buy. There's insurance policies they might want to buy to mitigate their risks. But you've got insurance for donors and the people who then receive what the donor provided. Health insurance issues for the gestational carrier. Is her health insurance going to cover this, or do you need to buy a policy? What's her life worth if she passes away while carrying your child? How much can you insure her life? What if she loses her reproductive organs while she is carrying your child? And you can buy an insurance policy to kick in. Short-term disability insurance for her, lost wages. If she ends up on bed rest for 2 or 3 months, you're going to be paying for her lost wages. And then miscarriage or stillborn insurance. There's insurance policies where they can actually insure the life of the child, so that if the pregnancy is not successful, they do receive the proceeds of the insurance policy so that they can afford to try again. Because for some families, it does mean that they might have to go all the way back to, okay, that was our last embryo, so now we need to do another cycle of IVF, or hey, now we're going to choose to do it with a donor egg, so now we need to pay for an egg donor. So, so how do people pay for this? And it's unfortunately, there's no great answer for everyone. Some people's health insurance includes fertility benefits and some do not. So it's just really dependent on the policies. And some health insurance define infertility differently than the CDC. So, there's a lot of LGBTQ couples where their insurance won't cover their infertility treatments because they don't have the insurance does not say that they have a medical need. We're seeing a huge increase in fertility insurance or benefits through employers. There's Progeny or Carrot Fertility are some of the big ones who are providing fertility coverage for the big employers. I recently had reason to read the benefits that Wells Fargo is covering for their employees, and I was really impressed. The challenge, though, was it said that everything had to be legal, or had to meet the law requirements of the laws, and that can be really challenging given the fact that every state legally handles surrogacy differently. There are grants and scholarships. Resolve, which is an infertility support organization, they keep an outstanding list. Family Equality also keeps an outstanding list of grants and scholarships. And this is, again, another place where we're seeing increase interest in people being able to access fertility treatments. And then there are specific financing, there are fertility treatment specific financing options. There's a lot of insurance companies that, or loans and insurance policies and things like that. And Resolve, again, has a really good list of that. So, but this is where it's then going to be up to you to help these people figure out how are they going to pay for this phenomenal expense. So it is really hard to put a number on it, but I will just tell you that if you have a same-sex male couple that needs to pay for an egg donor, they need to hire a gestational carrier to carry the child for them. They need to have a program that's going to find that gestational carrier and match them. And they're going to have to buy all those insurance policies that I just talked about. They are probably looking at $200,000 to create one child. So it's phenomenally expensive. And it used to be that people would say, well, I want to go for broke and go for a twin pregnancy if I'm going to do this. But it is the medical best practice is now that they're only going to transfer one embryo at a time, because they know from all the data that multiple pregnancies is not as healthy for the children or for the woman carrying the pregnancy. So it is considered the best practice to achieve a singleton pregnancy if possible. So, okay, I flew through a ton of information, but I am very open to questions. So please, feel free.
Yeah, absolutely. So if anyone wants to pop them in the chat, we can do that, or come off mute if you feel comfortable. You can ask us directly. Janice did work ahead of time and prepared questions based on people who weren't able to be here or didn't want to ask them in session. So we'll start with people that are here first, and then we'll go to Janice's questions next. Okay, so if everyone wants to remain here, then Janice, do you have your list of questions that you've been?
I do, and I am pulling it up, and some of these were answered during the conversation. So I'm just quickly filtering through which ones we kind of went through a little bit more in depth and which ones that we might be able to have a follow-up on. But we can start here with, I know we did cover this a little bit, but Heather, if you don't mind going over again some different ways that people might be able to pay for different types of family planning.
Well, I mean, obviously, health insurance benefits is the first one that they need to look at, and then they need to look at their employer benefits. Now, it's also an opportunity if their employer doesn't have fertility benefits to advocate to have the employer bring that on as an employee benefit. I mean, it is an attractive benefit to be able to provide to employees. And like I said, there are companies out there that specializes or handle this. So, the employers can contract with them. It's not like they have to figure out, well, what does it mean to have a fertility benefit? The other thing is in the world of adoption, so not assisted reproduction, but in the world of adoption, there is the federal tax credit, adoption tax credit, so that they can claim up to, and for this year it's $16,810 on their taxes of the legitimate adoption expenses and claim to have that back. The problem is there's an income phase out. And so there are a lot of families for whom then it just doesn't, it's not of benefit to them. So.
And how might people be able to find a community or support group of individuals who are going through the same thing, whether emotional support group, legal support group, healthcare navigation support group, et cetera?
Yeah. So I gave Megan some resources. So Resolve is the national organization for infertility support. And I mean, it's right there on the very front page of their website. Like, here's how you find some support groups. There's a lot of Facebook groups that people, have started. There's also something called surromoms.com. That's sort of a surrogacy blog, community that's really, really formed. So, and then if they decide like for women in particular, if they want to become a surrogate, like their matching program will oftentimes have a support group. But sometimes individuals experiencing infertility, they should ask their infertility clinic too. Are there any local support groups? Where can I get some support for this? And hopefully the fertility clinics are also going to have some resources to local counselors or psychologists who specialize in this kind of work too, because there is a lot of grief. There's a lot of loss that needs to be processed when going through this journey.
And let's see here. Are there any legal restrictions or regulations regarding assisted reproduction, such as age limits for recipients, requirements for counseling or consent, or limitations on certain procedures?
So this area is incredibly unregulated right now. So, and that is both good and bad. So you have the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. They are the professional organization for reproductive endocrinologists that are setting their standards, their ethical standards for exactly answering those kinds of questions. But again, it's a self-regulating organization. It's not binding on anybody. Same thing goes for attorneys that work in this area. I mean, obviously, we also have to comply with our state laws in terms of ethics, but I'm a member of the Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproduction Attorneys, and we have our own code of ethics and best practices. And so we do subscribe to that as well. And we consider ourselves the people who are going to set the industry standards. But when it comes to programs and if you notice, I use the word program, I don't use agency. Because when it comes to programs that match people with egg donors, sperm donors, embryos, or even finds gestational carriers for them, those are completely unregulated. They are businesses. And so they're like any other business. There's some that are good, there's some that are bad. And in today's online world, it can be people who are just sitting at their dining room table with a computer making matches. So, people need to shop around, and they also need to trust their gut. And they need to actually have conversations with people. It can't just be, oh, I sent an online inquiry, or I just read what's on the website. You have to have those personal connections in contact so you get a good feeling. So yeah, it is not heavily regulated. So there are a lot of risks.
Okay, thank you. And what kind of financial considerations should folks have for an unexpected dispute?
Oh, that's going to be hard because they've already like given their veins for creating their embryos or achieving the pregnancy. There can be disputes regarding. Actually, I would say the biggest time there's going to be disputes is if people don't use lawyers. When they've used a lawyer who's talked with them about let's talk about all the things involved in this process, whether that's you're donating your sperm. Let's talk about what that means. Let's talk about what the future means, what are the real implications. You're going to accept somebody's sperm. What does that mean? What responsibilities are you taking on? What risks are you taking on? I think that that's the best way to avoid the unexpected is to bring the lawyers in and bring the lawyers in early. We do not want to be drafting agreements and signing them, the night before the egg retrieval. It's kind of like doing the prenup the night before the wedding. Like we don't want to have that kind of pressure because we want people to, if people are coming in and are like, well, we just need an agreement, then they're not being open to all of the ramifications of what they're doing. So having people come in early. It's also, I mean, we're only a couple of $100 for an hour of our time. It's, it compared to some kind of a dispute or problem in the future. I always cringe when people come to me and they're already pregnant and then they say, well, now we want to do the legal stuff. It's important to know that, especially because you are all from all over the country, that every state gets to decide who is a parent. And so we have 50 different ways to be a parent. And so you can be a parent in one state and then you cross state lines and those laws don't find that you're a parent. And this is particularly of concern for those who don't have genetic connections to their children. And so when I said, the gold standard was to get an adoption order, that is because that's the only way we can ensure that you're considered a parent in every state in the country. So that's also the problem with online research. Everyone's going to Google to begin with, and that's fine. I think that's good for getting an overview or an idea of what issues you're talking about, but then you need to go to an attorney specific in your state to understand what the laws are or what you're dealing with in your particular state. So to me, that's the best way to avoid the legal catastrophes on the other side, because frankly, no one's going to be able to afford that big unknown.
And as a follow-up to, you mentioned getting started earlier, like what kind of timeline would you recommend people give for starting this process?
So people are going to their fertility clinics and they're waiting 3 months for their initial appointment. I would say the moment they're starting to look at the fact that they might need to use donor gametes, and when I say gametes, I mean eggs and sperm or embryos. Like anytime there just starts to be that idea that, okay, we're going to need somebody else. We're going to need a third party to help us, create this child. That's when they need to go talk to an attorney. And for LGBTQ couples, that they're kind of got the head start from we know we're going to need help. So let's have them come in. Let's have the conversation. That way I can talk to them about, what are all the possible things that they're looking at. And everybody's risk adversity is different. So I'm all about allow me to educate you. Let's talk about your specific situation. And then if you want to ignore every piece of advice that I'm giving you, that's totally your choice. But at least you educated yourself and you decided to move forward with the risks.
Thank you. And then going back a little bit to talking again about how to pay for the process, are personal loans an option for people to pay?
Yeah, and like I said, their resolve.org actually has a list of banks and insurance companies and places that help you specifically with financing for this journey. So I should also note that there is a woman who's got a company, and I'm gonna forget, it's I know for her adoption side, it's your adoption finance coach. But I know that she does the other side for surrogacy. And so for some of these employer benefits, these big fertility benefits, getting coaching on how to pay for all this and when do you need to have your funds available, that is sometimes part of the benefits that they provide. So
thank you. And I'm looking to see, I think those are all of the prepared questions that I had received from individuals before. Oh, and we have one in the chat here from Danielle. So if someone works at a company that offers fertility benefits, how much coverage do those programs usually provide? Like 20% of the cost, 50%?
it varies. The problem is that it varies. But I will say I was really surprised when I read the Wells Fargo one, which I don't know if it's managed by Progeny or Carrot, but the Wells Fargo benefit included they were covering the compensation to the gestational carrier. So it was more that it wasn't just here's the medical expenses, but it was actually the actual cost of having this person carry a child for you. So I that again, I fell off my chair. So
Excellent. Well,
Can I ask a question? Oh, hi. Thanks so much for your presentation. I was going to ask, I've been reading about how there's more with newer technology, the ability to like screen embryos for like genetic conditions and like family histories and things like that. Like, what is sort of the state of play with that and sort of the legal and other considerations?
yeah. Okay. So first of all, when IVF first began, what they would do is they would fertilize the egg and the sperm, and they would allow that blastocyst to develop for 3 days, and then they cryopreserved it. And that's kind of like old school. And that's where you would see people with 24 or 30 embryos. Well, they discovered that the cryopreserving at 3 days was probably too early because a lot of those embryos wouldn't make it if they allowed them to develop to 5 days. So now they allow them to develop to 5 days. And then they remove a single cell from each of those blastocysts, and then they do the genetic testing. And based on that, they're able to identify if there are any, genetic abnormalities that are showing up. And then they're able to actually grade the embryos. Are they AA or are they AB? I don't fully understand the full grading system. I don't have the PhD for that, but that is actually a huge part of the fertility process now. So you'll hear people say, I only have 1 or 2 embryos, but those embryos have been are the best that were available. It's like, so some people they'll have the genetic testing come back on the embryos, and then they'll choose to discard the ones that aren't likely to be viable, or maybe ones that may cause problems, or may have a genetic abnormality that maybe folks were specifically trying to avoid, like cystic fibrosis or spina bifida, things like that. So it is playing a huge part in this process in in hoping that we can get the best embryos available.
I have friends who just had a child who was a B embryo. I'm assuming they're not going to tell the kid that they were they were a B and not an A.
Right, exactly. And I mean, I've had friends who said, well, we only had 1 left, and she was kind of our black swan, and she turned into our beautiful white swan. Like, we just, people, you just don't know. But there are some ethical considerations that are really raised with that. Is it ethical to transfer an embryo that may then develop into a child with genetic abnormalities or cognitive differences? And that's where it's also just very personal and very personal values. And also, what do you think you're really capable of raising? And those are very deeply personal decisions that need to be made. So, so the gluttony of surplus embryos, I think, is starting to taper off, but we still have a whole lot of embryos though that are cryopreserved. And we have a lot of people that are abandoning them. They're just not they've stopped paying for the storage, probably because they want to put their head in the sand and not deal with them. And so some of the political efforts to make these embryos be treated as persons then may limit what people can choose to do with them. It may limit their ability to discard them or donate them to science. And depending on when they were cryopreserved, what technology was in use at the time, certainly if they were only ever allowed to develop to 3 days, there may be quite a few of those embryos that would never even that are not in any way viable. So, but long-term storage fees are really expensive, and so a lot of couples they get their annual storage fee statement and they're like, okay, I got to face this, I got to make my decision. So
those are great. Anybody else with questions rather? No, it's been super helpful. Be sure to complete the little feedback survey so we know how you liked it, what more we can do for you, as well as remembering to share or record rather your hours in the volunteer support portal. And Heather, this has been fabulous. Is there anything left that you would like to help us? You've shared with so much information, I think is more than what we anticipated, and we're going to digest that, and then we will give the resources of the network and obviously attachment to you and follow up to everyone who attended and didn't attend. So
no, I could go on and on, but I get it. There's only so much you can absorb in a single conversation. But thank you all very much for the opportunity to talk to you about this. Now that you've become a little bit aware, you're going to start seeing it every day in your life.
Oh, this is amazing. Well, thank you very much. Anybody else have any last minute thoughts, questions, concerns? All right. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you later.
So nice seeing y'all today.
Thank you.